Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg. Well, increasingly, divorce is occurring in the second half of life, a phenomenon termed gray divorce. Now, shockingly, it's not just after 20 or 30 years, but sometimes upwards of 50 years. Hard to believe. So today I have with me Lisa Zonder. She's a California specialist in family law who helps those who are making the painful decision to split, amicable and peaceful for everyone involved. We've also brought along Victoria Kirilloff. She is a certified divorce financial analyst and family financial mediator and financial neutral. She'll explain what that is. So welcome, ladies. I just, really want to dive right in and talk about that. Gray divorce is shocking. In our society, it's nobody expects that after being married that many years. And I know that we have so many considerations when somebody gets divorced at any point in their life, but late in life is a big deal. So let's just dive right in. Lisa, I'll start with you. What do you see as the number one reason for divorce after decades of people being together?
Yeah, so thank you first off for having me, Patricia. I'm so delighted to be here with you and Victoria. And I just want to give my little, as a lawyer, I can't resist this little just special disclaimer that today we're here for general educational purposes and not for any specific legal, financial, or tax advice. And I'm only offering my perspective today as a California divorce attorney and a coach, but not giving anything specific. So,
Okay.
right, if anybody has any really specific question, they need to ask a lawyer or
Okay.
a financial professional or a therapist, as the case may be. So thank you for that. To answer your question, which was really like, what are some of the reasons we have an increase in, like, or what's the number one or some of the reasons for an increase in this gray divorce arena? So I'm only giving my perspective here, but I think there are a number of factors, right? Number one is that people are living longer. Right now, the life expectancy, I think it's gone up to on average 86.6, and I think I heard that, and maybe for a man it's now like 84, and so no longer is 65 considered old, thankfully, as we near that age. And in fact, so if people are going to live longer, right, they're thinking when they get to like empty nest, place of empty nest or retirement, right? That I have years left ahead of me. I'm in good shape. I might be still working out, doing my exercise classes, socializing with my friends, going out for a happy hour, whatever it is that, people are doing at this stage, or working, if they're maybe in their 40s and 50s, maybe still working, maybe even into their 60s. And I know people into their 70s too. So it could be also in the workforce and also starting to slow down a little bit and balancing out with some social. So you have longer life expectancy. You have empty nesters, as I referenced before. So like if you have reduced obligations to your kids, and let's face it, those obligations never end. But the really hard part of the day to day, when they get a little bit lessened, right? Kids are out of the house.
Mm.
Why would you stay in a bad relationship? So there's another reason. So like it could be longer life expectancy, empty nesting. Also, like I mentioned, the retirement shift. If one or both spouses are retiring, and then there's a major shift in like their availability, the finances might be like on a fixed budget, which we could talk about more later. Um, so all of those cracks in the busy schedules that used to be there, they're now open, and you turn to your spouse and you're like, do I even want to be in the same house as you, right? Like stuff starts happening where, and also sometimes the mom, and I don't mean to be gender,
Yeah, that's
specific
okay. Yeah.
here,
Mhm.
but if the mom is the one who is doing the child rearing, understanding very much could be the dad too. But if the mom was the one doing the child rearing and now she goes back out into the workforce or starts to take on some, volunteerism or part-time work, and the dad who's potentially, or could be in reverse, obviously been out in the workforce a very long time, wants to slow down and sit in the big armchair and like put the TV on, or whatever he does, or maybe goes out with some friends and plays golf or tennis or whatever is, pickleball now is popular too, right? So they go out and they do their thing, but then they come home and it's like, who are you? Why am I in this relationship? And the intimacy may be changing, and the lifestyles. There may be a lot of differences one may be a homebody and one may be, you know, like out there all the time and social and like, I need to get another degree or advance myself or go out and get the consulting job. So I think all of those factors tend to play in, and that's just my perspective, right? I'm not Jane Goodall, I'm not sitting and watching, but I'm giving you this perspective from all of the clients who come through my doors and what I'm seeing with a lot of retirees who maybe they've even stuck it out and it's been bad for a while. And, you know, so like they're 4 decades into this marriage, right? And they're in their 60s or something like that. And, you know, they're like, I can't do this anymore. And I can't see another 20 years, you know, down the road in the same, you know, spot that I'm in. It's just, maybe it's loveless, the marriage. Maybe it's, you know, financially, one person's pulling all their weight and the other person just dropped out. I'm seeing a lot of those too. Like one person's just pulling back and saying, I don't want to do anything. Maybe COVID hit them and they're depressed. So lots of reasons for these gray divorces. I hope I didn't take too long answering you, but I
No,
think
no, no. It's very thorough because one thing I want to add, because I want to talk to Victoria about the financial ramifications. Um, because I write about this and I study this extensively. The lifespan is growing, but the average is still in the 70s. The people living to their 90s and 100, we hear about it every single day in the news, but truthfully, those are still the outliers. And what I think, if I can add this in, 65 as being old was born out of the 1933 Social Security Act, that you're 65, you stop working, you're done. So boom, we're old when we're 65. That fear is still instilled in us, especially those of us who are at that age. We haven't seen that, you know, the changes towards viewing older people as still vibrant and willing to go out and take on the world. So I think the fear sets in younger than it has to, if that makes sense, that people are very, very frightened of being in their 60s and saying, oh my God, I'm going to be 65 and still in this horrible situation. So like you said, it could have been brewing for a lot longer than when they actually come to you. So here we are in our 60s and our 70s, and life, you know, I didn't sign up for this. Life didn't work out the way I wanted to it. So I'm going to leave now. So Victoria, you know, when I was researching this topic, I read that grade divorce has enduring negative economic consequences, especially for women. So coming in, what are some of the questions women need to ask about their financial lives before initiating a divorce? And I'm saying women, let's be fair to the guys. There's plenty, like Lisa, you alluded to, there's plenty of situations where maybe the woman was the higher earner and the husband stayed home, or maybe it just worked out throughout their lives that the father was more involved with the children than the mother. But whichever parent, same sex, heterosexual marriages, whichever parent is carrying the bigger load financially or caring for the family financially, what do you do going in? What do you look for before you even start that process?
Well, divorce is actually the biggest financial transaction of most people's life, outside of death, unfortunately. And so a lot of times in marriages, there's a non-financially savvy spouse and the financially savvy spouse. And it's really on the non-financially savvy spouse, it's on their shoulders to then become educated in the family's finances. One of the things I spend most of my time doing, honestly, is helping people value their total marital estate. And so there's a lot of intrinsicies with the complexity of that and the type of assets you have. But sometimes you don't even know where to begin. You know, and it's really overwhelming because maybe the other person was taking care of all of the money and you just trusted them. And now you're having to recalibrate your financial picture. Well, heck, you don't even have one to begin with.
Right.
And so you have to become your own detective and really advocate for your future self. And for a lot of us, especially caretakers, we put other people's needs above our own. And it can be very overwhelming to start having to think about ourselves and have to advocate and to build an evidence base to then communicate our divorce division proposal upon. And there's a lot of underlying emotions that you have to work through. And so on my website, divorceanalytics.com, there's a 4-page guide where you can start actually going through and gathering the documents. There's a lot that goes into the preparation work of this. So the more that you give yourself a longer runway and just do a little bit here and there, the easier it is to actually gather your arms around all of the assets you have. But the other thing that you actually need to do is develop your budget. Now, I'm like always talking about budgets. I think everybody in finances, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in divorce, it's the most important thing because you need to know what your future life is going to cost.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to ask twofold. Full disclosure to the audience, I always check with my guests before we get on about things we should and shouldn't talk about. Victoria, I'd imagine, and Lisa, I'd imagine before someone is even thinking about getting divorced, should go through that process, should get this document and go through it and say, God forbid my spouse passes away or becomes severely infirm and I don't know what we have. I don't even know what's in the bank account. I think that process has to happen, like you say, way earlier than it has been. Do you find people coming to both of you because they're confused and in financial distress and they're just blaming the other spouse and saying, well, I'm going to leave because he or she won't share the finances with me or won't tell me what we're worth, or it's always chaos and I don't know how the bills are getting paid or they're not getting paid. Do people come to you in that distress frequently?
Oh, absolutely. I get a lot of clients, especially clients that have been married for long periods of time, where they maybe had a stronger role in the initial stages, but then one spouse became more controlling and aggressive over the family finances, and they just stopped fighting after a while, and they just kind of threw in the towel. And now, maybe they see a lot of money kind of being moved around, and they're curious as to how much are we actually worth. And unfortunately, when you have a controlling relationship, it's not just about who you go, what you wear, and what you see. It's also centered on what you spend. And I had a client, she was actually in her 80s. She had put off her divorce years and years and years. And one day she woke up and she said, I do not want to know what it's like to be married, or I don't want to know what it's like not to be single. And she had such a rude awakening because she had not really known how much their lifestyle was costing. And, he was a pretty wealthy property developer, but they had a lot of debt. And she had no idea to the extent of the degree of the debt they did have. And it was incredibly soul shaking for her. But as you mentioned, if you don't know what your marital balance sheet is when you're going through a divorce, well, the time that you then need it is when that person passes away, and then you have to do the estate administration. So I actually help people with that as well. It's a very similar process in all honesty, just different legal operations that surround it.
Yeah, and I would add, if you don't mind, I would just add that for me, what I get is a lot of the out spouse, the non-savvy spouse, using Victoria's terminology. They may be professionals, they may be lawyers, doctors, CEOs. I mean, it's not to take away from any of their, creativity, their wholeness, or their resourcefulness. But sometimes what they do is they feel a lot of guilt and shame because what they did was they divided the labor amongst them, and one took on child rearing and the other took on the finances, because it's often convenient that one spouse over the other is managing, right? It's not frequent that I see two co-managing spouses unless they're working in a business together. So I notice that when clients come to me, I encounter there's a lot of guilt and shame. Like I make $1 million a year, but I let my spouse take care of all of the finances. I don't really know what's there. I don't have a clue.
And you might be handing it over to someone who has no idea what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've had these high-powered clients actually get taken advantage by their partner because they didn't have access to whatever it was, the credit card statements or the bank accounts. And generally, a relationship that whenever there's some type of abuse going on, it's very easy then to start seeing signs of financial abuse and have that really get out of control. And oftentimes when one spouse is so dedicated to their job, they then, as Lisa said, have more shame associated to maybe not participating as much because they are so competent in their professional life that they have to work through those unresolved financial feelings, because it's okay. Like, nobody can be Superman, right? Like, maybe you can for a quarter, but for like long term, you get burnt out. And it's only natural to have that division of labor within the household.
I wanted to save this for a little later, but since we're on it, how often do you see spouses hiding money? Keeping,
Yeah.
intentionally keeping what's really going on from the other, not just hiding money, hiding success, but also hiding the fact that, I think you alluded to some debt, that a spouse may be in very serious debt financing a business, or bought a car that they couldn't afford, or whatever it might be. And how do you resolve that when someone comes to you to file a divorce? Is there an investigation that happens? Is it left up to the people to find out what, because if somebody's hiding something, they're going to continue to try to hide it as long as they can.
Yeah, there's mandatory disclosure laws in the state of California. So the law expects there to be full visibility. So once you come into an awareness of like what Victoria is talking about, where you don't have visibility, either because of abuse or just because you divided the labor, it doesn't have to necessarily be abuse. And I think I see both types of cases come in. Some are higher conflict, some are lesser. But you know, depending on how you come in, there are so many legal tools in the tool bag of the attorney. Not only do you have the mandatory financial disclosures, which I know Victoria probably will talk about more, because I often, you know, ship those out to her if I'm working with somebody who's, you know, financial professional like Victoria. But what I notice is that the clients oftentimes, after they get over the guilt and shame, the fact that they're now aware that they don't have full visibility, I can then begin a conversation with that client and talk about, you know, discovery rights. There are formal rights to take depositions, to demand production of documents. I usually send out a list of 50 categories of documents. There's no reason you should go into your divorce and not have an understanding, whether it's collecting the documentation through Victoria's 4-page guide, and using that as a, you know, as an assist, and or filling out these disclosure forms and insisting that the other spouse provide that information. And listen, they're not always going to cooperate. I'm not, you know, this is not the first any of us have heard of an uncooperative spouse who is completely recalcitrant and defiant, right? So then we escalate up the level of heat that we put on that spouse. We might ask the court for sanctions, for discovery, preclusion of, you know, certain types of, claims that they're making. So there are issue preclusions. There are definitely some tools in the tool bag of the attorney that can be used not only to get visibility, but to deal with that person who thinks they're above the law and they don't have to provide the financial information.
So there's a safeguard in place for the spouse who is on the short end of the stick, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I want to talk to both of you about, how do you put a monetary value on the contributions to the spouse that either earn less money, was a stay-at-home parent. I'm a parent. It's time and a half every single day as a parent for both of us, right? And then you're working, then you're managing a house. So I know that sometimes things slip through the cracks that aren't, like maybe someone's not intentionally not paying the bills or not intentionally hiding things, but it happens. So if you are to initiate a divorce, is the spouse receiving that? Are they automatically shut off from having to spend their money or transfer money or hide it? Does that paperwork immediately put a legal safeguard in place?
Do you want to take this first, Victoria, or should I?
Well, I think you can kind of lead in with the law side, and I'll follow up with some of the financial
Sure.
aspects
Okay.
of it.
Perfect. I just didn't want to monopolize the time. Okay. So, right. I mean, if you have a spouse who has been, sort of the supported spouse, I'll say, and then they file a divorce and they want to make sure there's continuity of bill payment, there is a concern because right off the bat, it's possible that somebody who's the higher income earner takes their money and segregates it out into their own separate property account. So in California, we have separate and joint, right? But the minute the divorce hits, someone files or they separate, they can take their money and then put it into their own segregated account. Well, where does that leave the stay-at-home mom or somebody who's doing the time and a half, if you will, and now they don't have sufficient funds to pay all the bills. So that spouse can either they have options, right? They can initiate a mediation if it's an amicable situation, right? There's a range of options. You can try and get into an amicable situation to try and figure it out, sort it out with the mediator. Or if it's more complex and you have an uncooperative, more high conflict spouse, you might opt for litigation where you file with the courts a request for order to get some spousal support, child support, and fees covered, so that even if they segregated their own separate account off to the side and you don't have access to it, you can ask that they be ordered to pay support. And also you can ask for certain of the accounts to remain, like credit card statements and such, to remain visible and accessible and to put both parties' names on it. So if somebody tries to bogart all of the accounts and doesn't give you access, you have a right to go into the court and say, Judge, they took my name off the credit cards. They took my name off of the banks. I don't have access to my own accounts. Now, at that point, it's possible to either divvy up the accounts, or it's possible that the court makes an order sorting out how the bills get paid on an interim basis. We call that, not to be confusing, but we call that a pendente lite order, meaning in the meantime, an order that covers those bills so that the spouse who is doing the time and a half and doesn't maybe have that sufficient income stream can get covered for the bills to make sure that they're not literally in a soup kitchen or having to be out on the street. So there is provision there in the law to cover that. And there's also the concept, which I won't delve into, I'll let Victoria have some time here, but there's spousal support and child support, and we can get into that in more depth in a few minutes.
So I want to ask you before, because I really want to hear from Victoria as well about that. Can you enforce that even without a divorce in process as a preliminary move? Say, I am ordering you legally to tell me exactly what you have, where it is. I want it all out on the table, and then I'll decide if I'm divorcing you.
That's really, you're talking about like a pre-divorce, how do I get visibility?
It's more like, so, what I hear so many times is people get divorced and then they find, they say, I didn't even know he had, $2 million in a bank account somewhere. And, I didn't even know about it. And then when I filed for divorce, I found out he had all this money that he was hiding from me. Can you find that out before you initiate?
Private investigators, Patricia. So right, that's what the private investigator can help with. But if you're at that place where someone's truly hiding like that, I mean, the odds are you're going to end up filing a petition and trying to get the help of the courts, because how long can you sustain yourself in the situation with lack of visibility and lack of control, right? I mean, then you're going to be sitting in an abusive, and does it happen? Absolutely. But people have recourse by filing, and they could file for a separation if they're not sure they want a divorce. But I mean, to do some sort of, I'll say like snooping and detective work, right? Like to do that ahead of time, get an investigator if you need to. It can get super expensive, but they can do, like help you check for, bank accounts and such, and, look into whatever your concerns are. Offshore account hunting is a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult, right? But yeah, you could avail yourself of different things. And also, like, can you get a copy of your own tax returns? You could go to your own CPA. You could get, copies of pay stubs, from, let's say you have a W-2 anyway, attached to the tax return. you could, you know, ask the CPA for those, right? Because the CPA inevitably will have those. You could probably do some of your own detective work in advance. So I'm going to let Victoria pick up
Yes,
here.
absolutely.
And I think running credit reports is also really like tremendously helpful. But go ahead, Victoria.
Well, you know, if you're able to be more amicable with your spouse, you have a lot better opportunity to really get a full accounting. At the end of the day, if someone is really working hard to offshore their money and do things that are, well, essentially bad behavior, it's important to know that there is no divorce police that is going to come out and slap, you know, put them in the paddy wagon and take them back to jail. You have to go through the court system, and it is incredibly expensive to even get these things going. So if you are in that position where you don't have access to a lot of funds, you absolutely need to be saving money or asking your family members to help support you. It's a very costly process, but to stay in a bad marriage, it's even worse. And I think it's really important for us to maybe talk a little bit about spousal support, especially for California. It's a really interesting topic because there are two different calculations essentially that you are conducting. For temporary support, which is support during the term of the marriage or during the term of the divorce, we use something called the DISOMaster. And this is really concerned with your total income, some deductions, and it really just is quick and dirty. It pops out the spousal support and the child support calculation. However, for spousal support, you actually need to take it a step further for the long-term support calculation. And this is based off of 17 different factors that it's called Family Code 4320.
Wow.
And it goes into all of these financial and non-financial topics. I think you mentioned at the beginning, Patricia, how do you value the work that you did during the marriage if you weren't working outside of the home? And
That's what I was asking. Is there a formula that, you know, it's a priceless job, as we all know, and there's also, you guys, I'm sure heard the case. It was the CEO of General Electric, I think, and the wife came forward and said, I played just as much a role in making him CEO because I entertained and I, you know, stood by him and I made his tuna fish sandwiches when we were poor and, you know, all those which we all can relate to as mothers and wives. And now he's worth 50 million and she wants 25 of it. I understood what she was saying.
well, and so spousal support is not designed to really make one party rich or impoverish the other.
Yes.
It's really designed to support a reasonable lifestyle. And so to determine what a reasonable lifestyle is, you need to drill down into the financial facts of the situation. And yeah, there are like all of the different factors that are important as well, but it really boils down to the top four.
Mhm.
The first is the marital standard of living. So you need to actually have historical bank statement and account statements that support what your lifestyle cost. Especially if you're in that high net worth space, you're going to have an interesting lifestyle that at the end of the day, you need to show the judge just how you lived. Because the second factor that is important is your post-divorce cost of living. So is it in line? Is it reasonable with what was established during the marriage? The third thing that you calculate when looking at spousal support is the payer's earning capacity or their ability to pay, excuse me.
Okay.
And so, you know, they have to essentially, if you're asking for, if there's $100,000 of income per month, it needs to be, you know, reasonable for each party. You know, somebody doesn't need to walk away with 95 and the other person has 5.
Right.
So the fourth thing that you calculate, it's called the recipient's earning capacity. And so this is where you have to really value what their skill set would be on the open market. There's no such thing as a free lunch, but if you have never, well, you haven't worked outside of the home in a long time, maybe you're older, and so there's not that much of a job market. If you're amicable, you can kind of have a off-the-cuff conversation with your partner as to what's actually reasonable.
Mhm.
However, if you are going through litigation or more of a high conflict situation, you'll have to get a vocational assessment done. And this is essentially valuing what your skill set would be, which would then be used for your earning capacity. And so you take all of these different 4 factors into play, And really, you determine what the needs base would be for the long-term spousal support. I think it's really important to know that that long-term support calculation takes into consideration all of those different factors, but short-term support is quick and dirty, and don't let your attorney use that for your long-term support calculation.
Let's circle back again now to the gray divorce. Okay. So all of these, if you split up at the height of your earning power, you're both working or one of you is working, and let's say you graduated college and got a skill, CPA, law degree, whatever it might be, medical degree, and you're not that far away from when you graduated, and then unfortunately you get divorced, you could go back and do that. But if you're 65 or 70, what happens there? I mean, I kind of leads into a couple getting divorced at such a late stage, they're going to have grown children who are already out on their own. But people are having children later in life. And, in some cases, the kids may be still college age while the parents are in their 60s. I'm an example of that. I'm 63 and my daughter's 23. She'll be 23. She just graduated college in May when I was, 63, and she was graduating college. And I have friends who are grandmothers of teenagers. There's all scenarios. So what do we do there? Is it just 50-50 at some point?
So no, let me jump in here. So Patricia,
Sure. Yeah.
right? So it's not, you have to look at different chapters, right? There's what's happening when people are working and they have active incomes, right, from employment. And then there's like that other side of the line where people are starting to get retirement streams of income. Now, there's a myth out there that the minute you retire, your support is done. Like you don't get any more support, right? So what happens if your divorce or separation is happening and you reached your 60s and you still need that spousal support because your 40-year marriage is ending? So we might be looking at retirement streams of income at that point. And then I want to also go back to your little question about the GE corporate situation, right? It depends on the division of assets. So you don't look at spousal support in a vacuum. Yes, what Victoria's saying, I think that's right. Like there's temporary spousal support that happens during the pendency until you get to the divorce trial. And then there's the spousal support that goes longer term after the divorce trial ends. But understand that in that post-divorce trial phase, the parties have already split up their assets. So if your husband has shares, a huge amount of shares, and is a billionaire in GE, right? And a lot of that happened, that work that he did happened during the marriage, you should be able to assert a community property claim. Again, I don't know in what state that took place. I don't know whether they had a premarital agreement, a postmarital, right? So every case is going to be different. So I don't want to address that specific case without having all the details in front of me. But generally speaking, if there is a business interest, you might have goodwill in that business and or stocks with values, and that would be subject to being divided and maybe split up 50-50 during the divorce. So we don't just look at income streams, we look at property division as well.
Okay. So that's a good point. Now, go ahead, Victoria. I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. I think it's really important that your listeners know that when you are doing a gray divorce, you really need part retirement plan and part divorce plan. They go hand in hand, and this is really the most crucial time of your financial life. We work so hard to get to retirement, and a lot of us, I'm seeing a lot of my clients, they're having that gray divorce, and so they need to figure out how to separate out the assets in a fashion that's reasonable, that takes into consideration Social Security, all of these different income streams that are available to you. So when you do look at your budget and you realize that your monthly burn rate's 15,000, you're going to be okay because you have 18,000 of income coming in. So you have to take a step back and understand really what your cash flow situation is going to be to have a secure and stable next chapter.
And if I could may I throw in just one thing to piggyback on that, Victoria? I agree with you. And a lot of people get stuck on the emotions of keeping the marital home and they forget about all the other assets. So the marital home is where they think, well, I've lived here all my my memories with my children are here, and it could be either party. And now you have another complicating factor, which is, well, I want to keep the home because the interest rate is less than 3%, while the going rate's, maybe 5.5 or something. Every week it's going to change, right? Or hopefully it changes and lowers. But like with these things, what people need to do is think about going to someone like you, Victoria, to get a budget done, because it's easy to get into this overwhelm of this scarcity mentality. Because I didn't control the finances and I didn't have the visibility, I'm assuming I'm going to go pitch a tent. I hear that from a lot of my out spouses, my maybe not the savvy party with the financial controls. But truth be told, it's like you have to look at the whole picture. Got to look at the property. You've got to look at life and long-term care insurances.
Yes.
You've got to do life and trust. You have to do the trust and estate planning. All of that goes together. And, it's really important. And Patricia, I just want to say, like, when you're going through gray divorce, the complexity issue around the assets, we tend to have higher quality and higher quantity of assets. So the implications, the tax implications, there's so much more there in a gray divorce.
Do you recommend people that come to you short of being very seriously abused? Do you advise that they wait until their children are finished with their education before they split up? Do you, I guess there's not a black and white answer with that. Do you find yourself advising people to give it a little more time based on the nuts and bolts, not so much what they're feeling?
I will say that everybody has to make that choice for themselves, but at the end of the day, you need to preserve goodwill with your partner, because a divorce is a negotiation. And if staying with the kids and the family, keeping everyone under one household until they're 18 is going to erode that goodwill and is going to build resentment, then your divorce is going to be hard. But if you're still friends with your partner, if you can still figure out how to work together and there hasn't been financial infidelity or maybe extramarital affairs, if you're still able to see that other person for being your co-parent, you can actually have a really beautiful uncoupling and set each other up for success. In fact, those are some of my favorite divorces where a couple, they just fell out of love with one another and they had the communication skills and they were brave. They took that courageous step and said, I love you, but I just can't be married to you anymore. They have really great relationships post-divorce, which at the end of the day, your kids are always going to be your kids. So you're never going to be outside of that relationship with your co-parent. So moving to a new definition of family, the sooner you can to preserve that is going to probably serve you much more appropriately in the long run.
And I just want to add, go ahead. I'm sorry, Patricia.
That's okay. That's okay. I was gonna piggyback on that a little bit. And are there situations that you see where a couple can stay together and live separate lives just so not to jeopardize their...
I want to say this. I deal with a lot of women now in my coaching practice as a divorce coach. And I start with the premise that each client is creative and whole and resourceful. And so what I do is I try and ask a lot of powerful questions of the client to help them to evoke their own awareness, to partner with them, to make a decision, because I don't think as advisors, we should ever tell any client, you need to do this and you need to do that, and that's a bad idea, because I'm not living that client's life. And they have maybe 20 years invested, maybe 35 years. They have children, adult children. It's a very difficult decision to be made. And and sometimes it's a question of going to marriage counseling. Sometimes it's a question of having a cooling off and a separation period. Other times they're going to stay with it because that's just what they know, and they don't ever feel like they can make the jump, because sometimes they lack the self-esteem. Sometimes they don't think the finances are there. And who am I to tell them this is legal advice? No, that's not legal advice. This is life advice. These are life decisions that you need to make. And you make it with your eyes wide open and slowly and carefully, because it does have a great impact on people. So I don't think we should be giving, whether we're the lawyer or the financial, I don't think we should be giving our clients that type of advice to very smart, creative, full, resourceful people who can make those decisions for themselves. If they're stuck, we can help get them unstuck and help them to move forward, but it has to be at their own pace and on their own internal, like, sort of holistic view of whether this is the right decision for them.
Do you see divorce remorse?
Mm, hmm. I mean, sometimes I hear from clients that maybe that, it wasn't, they could have stayed, or maybe they should have made it work. I don't hear that very often. Usually people give so much. It's such like there's so much um, pain and struggle. And it's such a process. In these longer grade divorces, I see people taking a very long time. It's a very slow burn. It's rare that I get someone who goes, okay, today I'm going to be divorced. Let's go.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't usually happen like that unless there's something going on with an outside partner.
Yeah, that's because you have the whole life together. And again, I saw in both of your bios, and we're talking about what I think what Lisa's talking about is the mental health and wellness, and how it plays such a huge role, in decisions we make, how we age. Do you see cases where, and this is really tough, that, one spouse is aging more rapidly than the other, and the other one wants out because they feel like this person's old and I don't want to be old anymore. I'm young and vibrant, and they're not.
Do you want to take this, Victoria, or should I?
Oh, you can go.
I would say that I see that more in my coaching than in the law practice, right? I mean, people come to me with a lot of different reasons or justifications or feelings around why they're getting divorced. A lot of it is money, and just, growing apart and different perspectives. I haven't, I think there are some who will say, and it's not often, but I will hear from some, that, yeah, the other person is just, what is it like? We're in two different political realms. Like,
Yes.
one's a staunch MAGA Republican and the other one's a staunch Democrat. And, we don't see politically, we don't see eye to eye, or, this person is just watching. I had one person come to me, my spouse watches Netflix all day, doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to move off the couch. And, and I look, my first place that I go to is, have you considered marriage counseling? Right? Because maybe there's depression there. Maybe there's the development of a medical issue, right? We sign up for better or for worse,
Yes.
In sickness and in health, right? I mean, so I think it's important that everybody give their, marriage some sort of a chance, even if those issues you are faced with a spouse who has, medical issue, right? Decide where your boundaries are, right? It's a very personal decision depending on the situation, I think. And that may be not just a coaching issue, it may also be something to tackle with mental health.
Victoria, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I would just add that I've noticed when there's a large age disparity between spouses, sometimes that's when, if someone rapidly ages, they are then suddenly aware of just how much that age gap is, and it can be kind of shocking. So it's always good to, when you're getting married, think about the long term. A lot of us don't realize that, just how long life can be. So
A lot of us don't take anything into consideration when we get married. You get married, you're all enamored, you're in love, you don't ask the right questions, and that
yeah.
that can rear
Isn't
its
that
head.
a whole episode, Patricia, right? That could be a
Yes,
whole
that's
episode.
a whole.
We screen enough for, like, before we get married. If I only knew X, would I have gotten married? What should I know?
I just, as an aside, it's funny you asked that, because I have a cousin who, when she got married, she's substantially younger than me. And when she got married, she asked her prospective husband questions that I said to her, how did you even know to ask? She's a young girl, early 20s. I said, how did you even know how to ask that? She goes, my mother told me everything she didn't like about my father as the years went by. This is interesting because they're still married, and the parents, and said and unraveled from the way you squeeze your toothbrush to your outlook on child rearing, your outlook on who takes care of which responsibility. What are your expectations? Do you think I'm going to earn a lot of money and buy you a car, or are you going to do it on your own? The questions were phenomenal. And I say I wish we all had that handbook when we were young and getting married, because most of us went in not blindly, but you guys know what I'm alluding to. And the other question I had for you, is we're getting a little close to time, is are divorces in general considered faultless, or does one party bear the brunt of being guilty when initiating? And does that dictate the outcome of the assets, whether it's infidelity or the person did something criminal, and they're divorcing based on that? Does that play a role in how the money and assets are divided?
Well, yeah, you've asked like a handful of questions in there.
Yeah.
So I'll try to give you a sort of an overview answer, right? When it comes to domestic violence, there are now new laws that affect the division of property and payment of spousal support. So if there's domestic violence, and we're talking about criminal conduct generally, and court findings, yes, there is some recourse there. But if you're asking about no fault divorce, so right, we have just basically an allegation in California of irreconcilable differences is all you need to allege in this state. Of course, there are other check the boxes for like incurable insanity, and I can't tell you, but yes, I've had clients literally say to me, but I think that's the box to check this one. So generally speaking, there is no fault. Whereas in other states, there may be some fault-based requirements, or periods of separation that go on for a period of time before the court will even allow the divorce filing. And again, religious-based notions and policies play into that. So, but yeah, California, but generally speaking, I want to say outside of that, like we're just talking notionally, outside of that, the court doesn't really care if somebody had an affair or, somebody was rude to the other person, unless there's enough substance and meat there to be able to file for a restraining order. And I don't mean to minimize emotional abuse, because it can leave scars that are just as bad as physical abuse. So I'm not talking about anything that fits in the domestic violence statutes in that realm. And there's certainly cycle of abuse where those cases are very difficult. And I don't know that we have time for it, but I'm just going to say sometimes it's very hard to detect cycles of abuse, whether it's financial coercion and control or sexual coercion and control, and isolation from family members. Sometimes it's very hard for the courts even to discern what's going on, because the person who is the perpetrator, oftentimes they're very good at managing appearances, and it's very difficult for the court to know that they're a bad player, and they have a lot of excuses. So I know that's a whole other separate subject, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there are some things that if you have questions about these issues specifically, I think you need to get specific consults.
Yeah, I appreciate every aspect of what we talked about, because I think the real thing is, again, talking about is being prepared beforehand, finding out what your rights are. Victoria, you said it so well, is that this, I'm going to send both of you to both Lisa and Victoria's website, is getting the information you need ahead, so you're not going in blindly. And I know if it's emotionally driven, you'll go in and you'll cave, or you'll change your mind, or you'll back down, especially someone who's afraid of a spouse might be afraid to tell you what's really going on, and fear for their, God forbid, and fear for their life, or, for their financial wellness. So it's complicated, but I really wanted to lessen that shock, that we're all hearing about people getting divorced older, and what it is they can do for themselves. Is there anything either one of you want to add?
I do. I wanted to say something when Victoria was talking earlier, and I wrote myself a note. For people who are having a difficult time affording, because it is expensive to go through a divorce in California, there are some resources I just want to let people know about. There's the Harriet Buhai Center in Los Angeles, as well as Levitt and Quinn, Leavitt and Quinn, Quinn. You can find them on the internet, but there are some and other low cost or no cost neighborhood services that do help some people get started with the divorce process. And also the court has a self-help and facilitator office. So you can get your divorce at least started. I'm not saying that necessarily they will finish your entire divorce, but there are some resources out there for people who are struggling. And I know that's the vast majority cannot afford, unless they're in a high net worth category, cannot afford the hourly rates of most of the attorneys in LA and across Northern California as well. So I do want to point people to resources. They're not alone, and they shouldn't fear that they have zero help. And there's also a process, yeah, absolutely. There's also a process called limited scope representation that people can look into. So that's worthwhile to note, that you can get an attorney as needed or a la carte for certain services if you can't afford full tilt representation.
And is that something that when people hear the fees or what it's going to cost, they just nix the idea of getting divorced?
It's a personal decision. I'm sure some have.
Yeah.
Sadly, because if you need to extricate yourself from an abusive situation, that would be a shame that would be the very thing stopping you. But there are resources, especially in the cases of domestic violence. So I don't want to make it seem hopeless. I do recognize that the pragmatics of it is difficult. It is going to be a little bit of a rough road, but hang in there because there are resources out there. So, and I want to thank you tremendously, Patricia, for having us today. This is, I hope, eye-opening and gets people to an awareness of what they should do before they get started if they're thinking about divorce. And final note for me is I want to say we don't encourage divorce either.
Yeah.
In other words, I just want to say, like, I'm not, an anti-religious, people should get divorced kind of person at all. What I'm saying is, if it's right for you, then these are the steps you should take. But I'm not at all encouraging it. I think people should try marriage counseling if that's right for them before they make that decision.
Victoria, what would you like to add before we finish?
Well, similar to what Lisa said, divorce is a personal decision, and it's when you've exhausted every other option that generally that's when people come to me. And my job is to help them have a very respectful process. And the more that you can focus on the financial facts, the easier it is, because then you know exactly what each person needs to be successful, and you can really take the high road, even if you're dealing with a high conflict spouse. So, lean into a divorce coach like Lisa. You have best of both worlds, the legal mind, but also the human side. You want an attorney that is really advocating for your best needs and interests, but also helping you become more self-aware. Because at the end of the day, this is truly a period of rebirth. If you are going through a divorce, it's not because it's easy, it's because the marriage has been hard, and you now need to see what life has to offer you. But with that, you have to have a very clear goal as to how you want your post-divorce life to look. Otherwise, you're going to experience divorce decision fatigue and end up maybe not creating as optimized of life as you could have.
That's an excellent point. You're going in with so much emotion, you're not thinking through how it's going to be on the other side. Yeah. I want to ask both of you individually, what do you like about getting older? Lisa, you want to go first?
Well, it beats the alternative, number one. So purely as a joke. But I think that we have an opportunity to share our wisdom with other people to the extent I have any, but joking again. But if there's anything that I can do, I want to be in service of others with my coaching and my legal practice. And I think we're, a bigger community of people, and we're all human. And I think we have to acknowledge our humanness. And so as I'm getting older, I'm aware of it's not just me, it's my family, it's my community, it's the greater global, world that we live in. And we need responsibilities, and we need to be there for each other as much as possible.
Excellent, because that's so true. We need a community. No matter where you are in this world, you need a community. Victoria, what do you like about getting older?
not making the same mistakes I did when I was younger. But then also being able to build and share that with others. You know, we have all lived very unique and wonderfully colorful lives, and it's when we put our minds together that we become bigger than ourselves. And it's truly amazing to see what you can do with like-minded individuals when you're all pulling towards one goal. And I think there's just a certain level of being more comfortable in your own skin that feels really good to me.
That's, yeah, fabulous. Absolutely. So I want to, for both of you, I want to thank you both so much for joining me here. This has just been it's a very, very important topic. It even opened my eyes to some things that I hadn't thought about, you know, in life, that about being prepared and about being informed and about being educated in everything you do. Lisa Zonder, Zonder, can be reached at her webpage, zonderfamilylaw.com. She's based in California. And Victoria Kirilloff can be reached at victoria@mywealthanalytics.com. We will post both of these websites on the link to the show as well. So again, thank you both so much for being here. Very informative. And, you know, I'll have you back at some point. There's always more to talk about, right? And these subjects seem to be a bottomless pit of information. And I want to thank all of you for listening to Age Well. Please subscribe to my channel for more engaging discussions on all things aging well. And for show topic discussions and feedback, you can contact me at www.patriciagreenberg.com. Thank you all. Stay safe and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.